the world that was, the lost geography of the Ice Age. To understand the history of our species, you must first accept that the map of the world as you know it is an illusion. It is a snapshot of a fleeting moment, a temporary arrangement of water and land that we have mistaken for permanence. If you were to look down at the Earth from orbit 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last glacial maximum, you would not recognize your own planet. You would see a world locked in a white, frozen paralysis, a planet that looks less like the blue marble of today and more like a hostile, alien terrain waiting to be terraformed. But the most disturbing difference would not be the ice itself. It would be the land. The continents were larger. The islands were mountains rising from vast grassy plains. The oceans had retreated, sucked up into glaciers that stood 2 miles high, locking away millions of cubic miles of water. The coastlines where the majority of humanity lives today, New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, were not coastal at all. They were inland plateaus, looking out over hundreds of miles of virgin territory that is now erased from existence, drowned beneath 400 feet of salt water. We tend to think of the Ice Age as a time of primitive struggle, a long winter where humanity barely survived in caves, waiting for the sun to return. But the geological reality suggests something far more complex and far more unsettling. This was not merely a time of cold. It was a time of entirely different geography, a time when the habitable zones of Earth were fundamentally located in places that no longer exist. To reconstruct this world is to reconstruct a crime scene where the evidence has been washed away not by a storm, but by the ocean itself. We must begin with the ice. It is difficult for the modern mind to comprehend the sheer scale of the cryosphere during the last glacial maximum. This was not a thin layer of frost coating the northern hemisphere. This was a geological weight so massive it deformed the crust of the Earth. The Laurentide ice sheet, covering most of North America, and the Fennoscandian ice sheet crushing northern Europe were physical monsters. They were dynamic, moving mountains of crystal, grinding bedrock into flour, carving valleys overnight, and creating their own weather systems. The weight of this ice was so immense that it pushed the continental plates down into the mantle. In a process known as isostatic depression, the land sank under the burden. Conversely, areas just outside the ice sheets bulged upward, creating temporary highlands that have since collapsed. This means the very elevation of the ground we walk on today is different from what it was then. The Earth is still rebounding, still slowly springing back from that crushing weight, meaning that any archaeological evidence left on those ancient surfaces has been subjected to 20,000 years of warping, shifting, and burying. But the ice was only the barrier. The true mystery lies in what the ice revealed. Because so much water was trapped in these frozen citadels, global sea levels plummeted. The recession of the oceans exposed roughly 10 million square miles of land that is currently underwater, an area roughly the size of South America and Europe combined. This was the forgotten Earth. Imagine standing on the beach in what is now modern-day England. Today, you look out at the gray, churning waters of the North Sea. But in the epoch of the Ice Age, there was no North Sea. If you stood on that same spot, you would be looking out across a vast, low-lying tundra known to geologists as Doggerland. You could walk from London to Amsterdam without getting your feet wet. You could trek from Denmark to Scotland across a rich, fertile landscape teeming with mammoth, reindeer, and wild horses. This was not a barren wasteland. Pollen analysis from core samples drilled out of the seabed suggests that Doggerland was the heart of Europe, a lush hunter-gatherer paradise with winding rivers, freshwater lakes, and rolling hills. It was the prime real estate of the Paleolithic world. And today it is gone, erased. It is a ghost country, dredged up occasionally by fishing trawlers that pull up mammoth tusks and harpoon points from the darkness of the ocean floor. This reality presents us with our first major paradox. We look for the remains of ancient human activity in the places that are convenient for us to dig: the high ground, the inland caves, the mountains. But human beings have always gravitated toward water, toward the coasts, toward the estuaries where rivers meet the sea. If the most hospitable, resource-rich land on Earth was located on these exposed continental shelves, then logic dictates that the bulk of the human population would have lived there. The cavemen we find in the high-altitude shelters of France or Spain may not have been the center of human culture. They may have been the outliers, the refugees, or the hunters working the fringes of civilization. The core of the human story during the Ice Age may well be lying 300 feet underwater, buried under silt and crushed by the pressure of the ocean. To understand the silence of the past, we must respect the efficiency of the planet's cleanup mechanisms. Earth does not preserve history, it recycles it. The drowning of these lands was not always a slow, gradual creep of rising tides. There is evidence of violent, catastrophic pulses, moments when the ice dams holding back massive glacial lakes burst, releasing freshwater tsunamis that scoured the landscape clean before the sea could even claim it. Consider the implications of this erasure. If a culture existed on the coastlines of the Ice Age world, utilizing wood, bone, skins, and perhaps even early forms of masonry, what chance would it have of surviving the transition to the modern world? First, the rising waters would inundate their settlements. Then, the wave action of the encroaching surf would pulverize structures. Finally, the accumulation of marine sediment would bury whatever remained under yards of mud. After 10,000 years, the chemical composition of the saltwater would dissolve almost everything organic. We are left with a silence that we have interpreted as an absence of presence. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the crime scene is at the bottom of the Atlantic. However, the Northern Hemisphere was not the only theater of this drama. While Europe and North America wrestled with the ice, the tropical zones of the planet were undergoing a different kind of transformation. The lower sea levels reconfigured the map of Southeast Asia into a massive continent known as Sundaland. Today, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are an archipelago of islands separated by shallow seas. But during the Ice Age, they were connected into a single colossal landmass twice the size of India. Sundaland was likely a refuge. While the north froze, the equator remained warm. The specific climate models for this region suggest it was a mix of savanna and tropical rainforest, a biodiversity hotspot that would have acted as a magnet for human migration. Genetic studies of modern populations hint that Sundaland may have been a cradle of genetic diversity, a pumping station that dispersed people outward as the waters eventually rose. Yet, because it is now submerged, Sundaland remains one of the least explored archaeological frontiers on Earth. We have mapped the surface of Mars more thoroughly than we have mapped the submerged river valleys of this lost continent. We know the rivers are there. Sonar scans reveal their ancient courses, winding along the ocean floor, cutting through what were once plains, ending in deltas that are now deep underwater canyons. Who walked the banks of those rivers? What campfire stories were told under the equatorial stars in a world that is now occupied only by sharks and silent currents? The disconnect between the geology and our history books is jarring. We are taught a linear progression of history. Humans were simple hunter-gatherers, the ice melted, we discovered agriculture, and civilization began around 6,000 years ago. But the timeline of the Ice Age challenges this simplicity. Anatomically modern humans, people with brains exactly the size of yours, with the same capacity for art, language, abstract thought, and engineering, walked this frozen earth for tens of thousands of years before the ice melted. Are we truly to believe that for 50,000 years, these sophisticated minds sat idle, staring at the ice, waiting for the temperature to rise before they attempted to organize, build, or create? Or is it possible that they did build, that they did organize, but they did so in the temperate zones, on the coastlines, in the valleys of Doggerland and Sundaland, places that were systematically wiped from the face of the earth by the greatest flood in geological history? The climate itself during this epoch was chaotic. We often picture the Ice Age as a static freeze, a long, boring stillness. But ice cores drilled from Greenland reveal a climate of terrifying volatility. Temperatures could swing wildly within the span of a single human lifetime. Dust storms of biblical proportions scoured the planet as the locking up of moisture in the ice sheets dried out the atmosphere. This was a windy, arid, dust-choked world. The loess deposits, massive layers of windblown dust found in China and the Americas, are the physical receipts of these storms. To survive in such an environment required a level of adaptability and ingenuity that we rarely credit our ancestors with. They were not merely surviving. They were navigating a planet that was hostile to life. They were tracking herds across land bridges that no longer exist, reading the stars and skies that were clearer and darker than any we have ever seen, and passing down oral traditions that may have contained the maps of this lost world. The deep mystery is not just where they lived, but how they perceived their reality. Did they know the world was changing? Did they notice the slow, inexorable creep of the ocean as the meltwater pulses began? There is a theory in geology known as catastrophism, the idea that Earth's history is punctuated by violent, rapid upheavals rather than just slow, gradual change. The end of the Ice Age was one such upheaval. It was not a gentle thaw. It was a collapse. As we go deeper into this investigation, we must confront the mechanism of that collapse. The meltwater pulses are well-documented geological events. Pulse 1A, for instance, which occurred roughly 14,000 years ago, saw sea levels rise by as much as 60 feet in less than 500 years. In geological terms, that is an explosion. In human terms, it is a generational apocalypse. Imagine a world where the ocean advances hundreds of feet every year. Every village built by the sea is lost within a decade. Every grandchild is forced to move inland, abandoning the sacred grounds of their ancestors to the rising tide. This constant retreat would have created a psychological trauma, a permanent state of displacement that may be encoded in the universal human myth of the Great Flood. It appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh in Genesis, in the Matsya Purana of India, in the lore of the Maya and the Aboriginal tribes of Australia. Why do cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years all share the same nightmare of a world swallowing water? Skeptics argue these are just local river floods exaggerated by time. But when you look at the geological reality of the Ice Age termination, the melting of millions of cubic miles of ice, the breaking of ice dams, the drowning of continental shelves, the myth begins to look suspiciously like a historical record. The flood was real. We just call it the Holocene transgression. But before the melt, before the catastrophe, there was the stillness of the deep freeze. And in that stillness, there are anomalies that suggest the standard narrative of small, scattered bands of hunters might be incomplete. We find hints of long-distance trade. We find specific types of flint and obsidian moving thousands of miles from their sources. We find Venus figurines, small, carved statuettes of the female form, appearing across a vast stretch of Eurasia, from France to Siberia, showcasing a unified stylistic culture that spanned a continent. This suggests a network, a web of connection that operated despite the glaciers, despite the cold. If ideas and symbols could travel 4,000 miles across the Ice Age tundra, what else was traveling? Language, technology, astronomy? The silence of the Ice Age is heavy. It is the silence of a library that has burned down. We are left picking through the ashes, finding a charred page here, a fragment of a binding there, and trying to reconstruct the entire history of the world. We look at the stone tools and assume that was the limit of their technology. But stone survives. Wood rots. Leather decays. Cordage disintegrates. If a civilization built primarily with organic materials, as many complex indigenous cultures have done throughout history, their physical footprint would vanish almost without a trace within a few centuries. The bias of stone creates a distorted view of the past. We define the Stone Age not because it was an era of only stone, but because stone is the only thing that lasted long enough for us to find it. We are judging the complexity of an entire epoch by its garbage, by the indestructible debris left behind, while the intricate, biodegradable reality of their lives has dissolved into the soil. Let us descend deeper into the specific regions that define this era. Let us look at the Mammoth Steppe. This was the dominant biome of the Ice Age world, a biome that has no modern analog. It stretched from Spain across Eurasia over the Bering Land Bridge and into North America. It was a vast, cold grassland, dry and crisp, supporting a biomass of animals that rivals the African Serengeti of today. Herds of woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, bison, horses, and reindeer numbered in the millions. This was a meat locker of unlimited resources. For a human predator, this was not a place of scarcity. It was a place of unimaginable abundance, provided you could withstand the cold and coordinate the hunt. The sheer calorie density available on the Mammoth Steppe allowed for high population densities in certain corridors. Evidence from sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dating back nearly 30,000 years, shows us people who were making ceramics thousands of years before the official invention of pottery. They were weaving textiles. They were building semi-permanent structures using mammoth bones and tusks to support skins, creating architecture from the bodies of the animals they hunted. These were not temporary camps. These were settlements. At Sungur, in Russia, graves dating to roughly the same period reveal bodies adorned with thousands of ivory beads, each one taking an hour or more to carve. The man buried there wore a tunic covered in 3,000 such beads. The children buried beside him had even more. The labor hours invested in these garments represents a surplus of time, a hierarchy of society, and a dedication to aesthetics that speaks of a culture far removed from the desperate struggle for survival we often imagine. If they had the time to spend thousands of hours carving ivory beads for the grave of a child, they had mastered their environment. They were not hiding from the Ice Age. They were thriving in it. And if they could do this in the harsh interior of Russia, what were they doing in the temperate, resource-rich deltas of the now submerged coastlines? We must consider the possibility that the best of the Ice Age world is missing. We are looking at the hinterlands, the backwoods, the remote outposts that happen to be high enough to remain dry. We are trying to judge the Roman Empire by excavating a single farmhouse in the rural mountains of Wales, while Rome itself lies at the bottom of the sea. The skepticism of the scientific community is necessary. We cannot invent civilizations where we find no evidence, but we must also apply skepticism to the absence of evidence. Is the lack of cities proof that none existed? Or is it proof that the geological shelf life of a city built on an Ice Age coastline is zero? The sea is a grinder. It does not just cover, it erases. A structure built of wood, mud brick, or even soft stone, subjected to 10,000 years of tides, currents, and storms, effectively returns to its elemental components. The fact that we haven't found Atlantis is not proof that advanced cultures didn't exist. It is exactly what we should expect if they did exist in the areas that were subsequently drowned. But there are anomalies that are harder to explain away. There are structures that defy the timeline. The most famous, of course, is Göbekli Tepe. While built at the very end of the Ice Age, in the transitional period, its existence throws a wrench into the gears of the standard model. Here we have megalithic architecture, massive T-shaped pillars with exquisite relief carvings, arranged in complex geometric circles. It dates to 9600 BC, thousands of years before the pyramids, thousands of years before the supposed invention of agriculture or metal tools. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They lived in a world without the wheel, without writing, without farming. Yet they organized a labor force, engineered a monumental site, and possessed a symbolic language of profound complexity. If they could do this the moment the ice began to recede, it implies a depth of cultural and engineering heritage that stretches back into the Ice Age itself. You do not wake up one morning after the glaciers melt and decide to build a cathedral. You build it because you already know how. You build it because the knowledge has been carried through the deep freeze, preserved, and then unleashed when the conditions allowed. This leads us to a disturbing thought. Göbekli Tepe might not be a beginning. It might be a survivor's monument, a frantic attempt to preserve the symbols and knowledge of a world that was rapidly vanishing under the rising seas. The pillars are carved with animals: scorpions, vultures, lions, foxes. But are they just animals? Or are they constellations? Some archaeoastronomers suggest the site is a star map, recording the sky of the epoch and perhaps recording the date of a catastrophe. If Göbekli Tepe is the smoking gun, what was the bullet? What actually ended the Ice Age? Was it simply the slow orbital cycles of the Earth, the Milankovitch cycles that tilt the planet toward the sun? Or was it something more sudden, more violent? This brings us to the edge of the Younger Dryas boundary, a period of chaotic climate fluctuation that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. The world was warming, the ice was retreating, and then suddenly, within the span of a few years, the planet was plunged back into a deep freeze that lasted for 1,000 years. Then, just as abruptly, it warmed up again. The cause of this sudden freeze and the subsequent rapid melt is one of the most heated debates in science. One theory, dismissed for decades but now gaining traction due to new geological evidence, is the cosmic impact hypothesis. The idea that a fragmented comet or asteroid struck the North American ice sheet, vaporizing millions of tons of ice instantly, destabilizing the atmosphere, and causing the global wildfires and floods that we see in the geological record. If this happened, and the presence of microspherules, nanodiamonds, and high platinum concentrations in the soil layer of that time suggests it might have, then the end of the Ice Age was not a season, it was an event. A day when the sky turned black, the ice shattered, and the oceans rose up to swallow the land. Imagine living through that. Imagine being a member of a culture that had adapted perfectly to the Ice Age world for 20,000 years. You know the migration routes, you know the coastlines, you have your trade networks. And then the sky falls. The sea invades the land. The temperature plummets. The animals you depend on vanish. This would be a trauma that would sear itself into the collective memory of the species. It would shatter whatever civilization existed, forcing the survivors into a dark age of scattering and subsistence. The primitive hunter-gatherers we find in the archaeological record of the early Holocene might not be people who had not yet advanced. They might be the traumatized survivors of a world that had been destroyed. Mad Max in reindeer skins. The Ice Age Earth was a different planet. It had different gravity fields due to the ice mass. It had a different rotation speed. It had different magnetic intensity. It was a world of giants. Giant beavers the size of bears, giant sloths that could look into a second-story window, giant armadillos, and walking among them were humans who were physically robust, possessing bone density far higher than ours, fueled by a high-protein diet, navigating a landscape of white silence and thundering herds. To reconstruct their lives, we must look at the Solutrean culture of ancient Europe. Around 20,000 years ago, these people were crafting stone blades of such thinness and symmetry that they rival modern scalpels. These were not just tools, they were art. The laurel leaf points found in France are too delicate to be used as spear tips. They shatter if thrown. They were ceremonial. They were status symbols. They were evidence of a culture that valued aesthetics and craftsmanship beyond utility. And then there are the caves, the descent into the underworld. The art found in Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira is not crude graffiti. It is cinematic. The artists used the contours of the rock wall to give the animals three-dimensional volume. They used flickering torchlight to make the images appear to move. They understood perspective, shading, and motion blur. Why did they go deep into the earth to paint these masterpieces? Some of these chambers are nearly inaccessible, requiring crawling through narrow, suffocating tunnels for hundreds of yards. This was not a gallery for public viewing. This was a sanctuary, place of initiation. The acoustics in these painted caves are often resonant. If you hum or chant, the sound amplifies. It is likely that these were spaces of ritual, where sound and image combined to create an altered state of consciousness. In the pitch black of the Ice Age winter, the shaman would lead the initiate into the belly of the earth, where the walls would come alive with the spirits of the bison and the lion. This speaks to a complex spiritual life, a belief in a reality beyond the physical. It implies a class of people, shamans, priests, artists, who were supported by the community, freed from the daily grind of hunting to maintain the connection with the unseen world. That is the hallmark of civilization, specialization. But let us pivot back to the physical world, to the geography of the lost continents. We mentioned Beringia, the land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska. We often see it on maps as a narrow strip, a highway for migration. But Beringia was not a bridge. It was a subcontinent. It was 1,000 miles wide. It existed for thousands of years. People didn't just cross it. They lived there. Beringia was a refuge from the worst of the ice. It was a dry, grassy plain that may have supported a unique population that was genetically distinct from both the Asians they left behind and the Native Americans they would become. This Beringian standstill hypothesis suggests that the ancestors of the Americas lived on this lost landmass for perhaps 10,000 years, completely isolated, developing their own culture and language before the rising seas forced them east into the Americas. 10,000 years. That is twice the length of recorded history, an entire epic of human experience, played out on a land that is now under the icy waters of the Bering Strait. What did they call their land? What gods did they worship? What wars did they fight? The ocean keeps these secrets. This pattern repeats globally. The Persian Gulf, today a shallow sea rich in oil, was a dry, fertile river valley during the Ice Age. It was fed by the Tigris, Euphrates, Karun, and Wadi Batin rivers. It would have been an oasis, a Garden of Eden scenario, lush and watered, surrounded by deserts. It is highly probable that the populations of the Near East concentrated there. When the sea levels rose and the Gulf flooded, these people were pushed up into the Mesopotamian plains, carrying with them the memories of a paradise lost to the water, perhaps planting the seeds of the Sumerian civilization. The Black Sea was a freshwater lake, much smaller than it is today, with settlements along its rim. The eventual breach of the Mediterranean into the Black Sea, a catastrophic waterfall of salt water, may have been the specific event that inspired the flood myths of the Near East. Everywhere we look, the cradles of civilization are actually the lifeboats. They are the high ground where people retreated when the real cradles, the continental shelves, were drowned. We are studying the refugees, thinking they are the pioneers. The atmospheric conditions of the Ice Age also warrant a closer look. The lower sea levels meant less surface area for evaporation, leading to a drier world. But the polar jet streams were pushed south, compressing the climatic zones. This compression created fierce winds. The sound of the Ice Age was the sound of the wind, a relentless, howling gale that shaped the dunes, polished the rocks, and forced humans to seek shelter. The dune fields of Nebraska or the vast sand seas of Australia are remnants of this arid, windy time. But within this harshness, there were pockets of stability. The refugia, small, isolated valleys where the microclimate allowed trees to survive, where animals congregated. These refugia were the arcs of biodiversity. For humans, locating these zones was the difference between life and death. Knowledge of the land was the ultimate technology. A map was not on paper. It was in the mind, sung in verses, encoded in stories. If you forgot where the water was, you died. If you forgot where the flint source was, you died. The mental capacity required to memorize the geography of a continent, the medicinal properties of hundreds of plants, the migration patterns of dozens of animal species, was immense. We outsource our memory to hard drives. They honed theirs into a razor-sharp survival tool. But what of the alternative evolution aspect? The Ice Age was not just the domain of Homo sapiens. We were not alone. When the ice first descended, there were other minds on Earth. The Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, the hobbits, Homo floresiensis, in Indonesia. For thousands of years, we shared the planet. We interacted, we fought, and as genetics now proves, we bred. We are hybrids. Most people outside of sub-Saharan Africa carry Neanderthal DNA. Populations in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA. The Ice Age was a time of interspecies contact. Imagine the encounters. You are a band of Homo sapiens, tall, slender, dark-skinned, moving into the twilight forests of Europe. And there you meet the others, the Neanderthals. They are shorter, but impossibly broad, built like powerlifters with pale skin and large, wide eyes adapted to the low light. They are quiet. They ambush hunt with thrusting spears. They bury their dead with flowers. Are they enemies? Are they gods? Are they trolls? The folklore of trolls, dwarves, and wild men that permeates European mythology may not be fantasy. It may be a distorted ancestral memory of these cousins we shared the ice with. The Neanderthals survived the glacial cycles for hundreds of thousands of years. They were the true masters of the cold. They had larger brains than we do, but they vanished as the last ice age peaked. Why? Did we kill them? Did we outcompete them? Or were they simply too specialized, too adapted to a specific way of life that could not survive the changing world? There is a melancholy in their disappearance. A different way of being human was extinguished, a different kind of consciousness. If the Denisovans had survived instead of us, what would civilization look like? Their teeth were massive, their tolerance for altitude incredible. The Tibetans today have a gene that allows them to breathe easily at high altitudes, a gene they inherited from the Denisovans. We are wearing the genetic gifts of the ghosts we replaced. The timeline of the Ice Age forces us to confront the great filter of our past. How many times did humanity rise, develop complexity, and then get knocked back down by the climate? We assume our current trajectory is the only one. But in 100,000 years of the Ice Age, there was time for cultures to bloom and wither a dozen times over. Wood decomposes. If a culture builds with wood, weaving intricate cities in the forests of the Amazon or the jungles of Sundaland, and then that culture collapses, the jungle eats the evidence in a few centuries. We find the stone temples of the Maya because they used stone. But what of the Amazonian civilizations that used earth and wood? We are only now finding their massive earthworks, hidden under the canopy, proving that millions lived where we thought there was only wilderness. Apply this logic to the Ice Age. The absence of stone ruins is not the final verdict. It is merely a limitation of the material. As we visualize this frozen earth, we must also visualize the night sky. With no light pollution, the stars were a blinding canopy. The Milky Way would have cast a shadow. The movements of the celestial bodies were the clock and the calendar of the Paleolithic. They watched the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that takes 26,000 years to complete a cycle. This cycle, the Great Year, seems to be encoded in myths around the world. The numbers 72, 2160, 4320, numbers related to precession, appear in the architecture of Angkor Wat, in the pyramids of Egypt, in the Norse sagas. Did the Ice Age astronomers understand this cycle? Did they know that the Earth's climate was tied to the stars? If they did, then they knew that the ice would not last forever. They knew that a season of fire was coming. This adds a layer of tragic foresight to their existence. They were the watchers of a cosmic clock, counting down the generations until the great summer would return to drown their world. The fact versus paradox structure of this mystery is relentless. Fact: the ice sheets contained enough water to raise sea levels by 120 meters. Paradox: the meltwater curves show periods of sudden, explosive rise, meltwater pulses, yet we struggle to find the physical impact crater or trigger event that could melt that much ice that fast. Scientific counter-question: is it possible that the ice sheets were inherently unstable? That they collapsed under their own weight without an external trigger? Or are we missing a piece of the puzzle? A solar flare, a comet, a volcanic winter that tipped the balance? The geological evidence for the Missoula floods in the American Northwest gives us a glimpse of this violence. A glacial dam broke, releasing a wall of water 2,000 feet high, moving at 60 miles per hour. It stripped the land down to the basalt bedrock, creating the scablands. It was a flow of water equal to 10 times the flow of all the rivers in the world combined. This happened. It is not a theory. It is etched into the stone of Washington state. Now, imagine a similar event happening on the coastlines or in the burst of the glacial lakes into the oceans. These were events that would have wiped out any human settlement in their path instantly. No ruins, no bones, just clean rock and mud. The fragility of our history is exposed by the ice. We are a species that lives in the interglacial, the brief, warm pause between the freezes. The Ice Age is not an anomaly. It is the norm. The warm period we enjoy now is the exception. For the last 2 million years, Earth has been an ice planet, thawing out only briefly before freezing again. We are the children of the thaw, but our ancestors were the children of the frost. And as we continue this journey into the forgotten Earth, we must ask, what did they know that we have forgotten? What wisdom was lost when the libraries of the coastlines were flooded? To understand what was lost, we must look at the places where the Earth remembers. We must turn our gaze to the Amazon. Today, we view the Amazon rainforest as the ultimate wilderness, a pristine, untouched tangle of nature that is hostile to human civilization. But beneath the canopy, the soil tells a different story. In vast swathes of the Amazon basin, covering an area the size of France, there exists a layer of soil known as terra preta, dark earth. This is not natural soil. The natural soil of the rainforest is yellow clay, acidic and nutrient poor. Once the trees are cut, it becomes barren within a few years. But terra preta is black, rich, and teeming with pottery shards, charcoal, and organic waste. It is fertile enough to support intensive agriculture for centuries without degradation. It is an engineered soil. This implies that the Amazon was not a wilderness during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. It was a garden. It was a managed landscape, cultivated by a civilization that understood soil chemistry better than we do today. They used biochar, charcoal produced at low temperatures, to lock nutrients into the ground. We are only now rediscovering this technology as a solution for sustainable farming, yet someone in the Amazon perfected it thousands of years ago. If the Amazon was a garden, then the primitive tribes we see today are not living fossils of the Stone Age. They are the survivors of a collapse. They are the descendants of a complex agricultural society that dissolved when the climate shifted and the diseases of the Old World arrived much later. But the roots of this management go deep. The distribution of fruit trees in the Amazon is hyperdominant near ancient settlement sites. The forest itself is an artifact. This forces us to reevaluate the noble savage trope. Our ancestors were not passive inhabitants of the ecosystem. They were geoengineers on a local scale. They shaped the biosphere to suit their needs, but they did so with a technology based on biology, not machinery. And because their machines were trees and soil, their ruins look like nature. Now, shift your focus from the wettest place on Earth to the driest, the Sahara Desert. If you were to walk across the Sahara 10,000 years ago, during the Green Sahara period, a humid phase triggered by the same orbital shifts that ended the Ice Age, you would not need a camel. You would need a canoe. The Sahara was a savanna, dotted with megalakes. Lake Megachad was bigger than the Caspian Sea is today. The rock art in the Tassili Eniger Plateau in Algeria depicts herds of cattle, giraffes, and, most hauntingly, people swimming. It shows scenes of domestic life, of abundance, of a population density that is impossible today. But hidden within this Green Sahara narrative is a geological anomaly that points back to the Ice Age itself. The Great Sphinx of Egypt. Standard Egyptology dates the Sphinx to around 2500 BC, attributing it to the pharaoh Khafre. But the Sphinx sits in an enclosure, a limestone pit cut out of the bedrock. The walls of this enclosure show a specific pattern of weathering: deep, vertical fissures and undulating, rolling curves. Geologists who study rock erosion point out that this is not the result of wind and sand. Wind erosion creates horizontal stratification, sharp, layered lines. The erosion on the Sphinx enclosure is the result of precipitation-induced weathering. Rain. Heavy, relentless rain, falling for centuries. But the Giza Plateau has been a desert for the last 5,000 years. To find a climate wet enough to cause that level of erosion, you have to go back to the Green Sahara period, or even further back to the chaotic rains of the Younger Dryas termination, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. If the geology holds true, the Sphinx is not a monument of the dynastic Egyptians. It is a legacy monument. It is a marker left by a culture that stood on that rock when the Giza Plateau was a lush savanna looking out over a much lower Nile Valley. The head of the Sphinx, which is disproportionately small compared to the body, may have been recarved by the later pharaohs, turning a much older, leonine statue into a royal portrait. What makes this chilling is the orientation. The Sphinx faces due east. It watches the rising sun. If you roll back the star maps to the epoch of 10,500 BC, on the morning of the spring equinox, the constellation rising directly in front of the Sphinx was Leo, the lion, a lion on the ground, mirroring the lion in the sky. This is the as above, so below principle, the Hermetic idea that the earth is a mirror of the heavens. If this alignment is intentional, it locks the construction of the Sphinx to the exact date of the Younger Dryas catastrophe. It suggests that the monument was built not as a tomb, but as a clock, a time capsule in stone, marking the end of one world and the beginning of another. This brings us to the most uncomfortable paradox of all, the map of the unknown. In 1929, a map was discovered in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Painted on gazelle skin in 1513 by the Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, it depicts the coasts of Europe, North Africa, and Brazil with reasonable accuracy. But as you look south past Brazil, the map shows a landmass connecting to South America and curving eastward. The coastline depicted corresponds remarkably well to the subglacial coast of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, and even then, it was seen as an ice shelf. We did not know the shape of the land beneath the ice until we used seismic sounding technology in the mid-20th century. Yet, Pyrie Reis, in his own notes, claimed he compiled his map from 20 older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great and beyond. If the Pyrie Reis map genuinely shows the coastline of Antarctica without ice, it implies that the source maps were drawn when that land was ice-free. The last time Queen Maud Land was free of ice was at least 6,000 years ago, and likely far longer. Who was mapping Antarctica in prehistory? And more importantly, how? To map a coastline requires trigonometry. It requires the ability to calculate longitude, a problem that Western civilization did not solve until the invention of the chronometer in the 18th century. This brings us to the maritime paradox. We assume that Ice Age humans were land-bound, but the colonization of Australia, which happened at least 50,000 and possibly 65,000 years ago, required crossing open ocean. Even with lower sea levels, there was never a land bridge to Australia. There was always a deep water trench, the Wallace Line, with a gap of at least 50 miles of open sea where the land is not visible from the other side. You do not cross 50 miles of ocean on a drifting log with a pregnant woman by accident. You do it with intent. You do it with a vessel capable of handling swell. You do it with a navigation system. If humans were navigating the open oceans 50,000 years ago, then the ocean was not a barrier. It was a highway. The World Wide Web of the Ice Age was the sea. And just like the coastlines, the evidence of this maritime culture has rotted away. We have found fish hooks made of shell in East Timor dating to 42,000 years ago that are designed to catch deep-sea tuna. Tuna are fast, powerful fish found in the deep ocean. Catching them implies heavy nets, strong lines, and boats that go far from shore. This radically changes our picture of the caveman. Instead of a huddled figure wrapped in furs, picture a Polynesian-style navigator, reading the swell patterns, the bird migrations, and the stars, sailing a catamaran between the islands of Sundaland. This was a culture of the horizon, and here lies the tragedy. A maritime culture is inherently vulnerable to sea level rise. When the water rose 400 feet, it didn't just flood their homes. It dismantled their infrastructure. The harbors, the docks, the boatyards, all gone. The survivors who retreated inland were the ones who didn't know the sea. The specialists, the navigators, the ones who lived on the edge, were the first to be displaced or destroyed. We are the descendants of the landlubbers. We are the children of the people who stayed behind in the hills. The wisdom of the deep ocean navigators was lost, surviving only in fragments of Polynesian wayfinding and the myths of culture heroes who arrived from the sea to teach the arts of civilization. In almost every ancient culture, Sumerian, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, Peruvian, there is a foundational myth of the civilizing seven, or the Apkallu, or the Viracocha. These are beings who arrive after a great cataclysm, coming from the sea, describing themselves as survivors. They are not gods in the magical sense. They are teachers. They teach agriculture, masonry, astronomy, and law. They are described as tall, bearded, and wearing strange clothes, often interpreted as fish scales, or perhaps protective gear. Mainstream history dismisses these as solar metaphors. But from an alternative history perspective, they sound like refugees. If a sophisticated maritime culture in Sundaland or Doggerland realized their world was ending, they would have sent out ships, not to conquer, but to preserve, to find the high ground and plant the seeds of their knowledge before it was too late. Maybe the gods of the ancient world were just men and women who possessed the scientific heritage of the Ice Age. The distinction between magic and technology is simply a matter of understanding. To a Neolithic hunter who has never seen a straight line in architecture, a perfectly square block of limestone weighing 200 tons is magic. To the engineer who understands leverage and counterweights, it is just work. This brings us to the impossible stones. Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter. The Roman ruins are impressive, sitting on top of a platform. But the platform itself is inexplicable. The foundation contains 3 stones known as the trilithon. Each one weighs approximately 800 to 1,000 tons. To visualize 1,000 tons, picture a dozen Boeing 747s stacked on top of each other, or 2,000 average cars compressed into a single block. The Romans possessed cranes, but their maximum lift capacity was around 3 to 5 tons. They did not move 1,000-ton stones. No one in recorded history has moved a 1,000-ton stone. We can struggle to do it today with our largest crawler cranes, and even then, it is a logistical nightmare. Yet, these stones were quarried, shaped, lifted, and placed with such precision that you cannot fit a razor blade between them. And in the nearby quarry, there is a stone left behind, the stone of the pregnant woman. That weighs 1,200 tons, and another, recently discovered, weighing 1,650 tons. Why go to the trouble of moving a stone that size? It is engineering overkill. You can build a perfectly stable platform with 50-ton stones. To use a 1,000-ton block implies that the builders were not just showing off. They were utilizing a technology or a physics that made the weight irrelevant. Or they were building for a purpose we do not understand, perhaps to withstand forces, earthquakes, floods, that would level a standard structure. The standard archaeological explanation is that the Romans did it somehow using thousands of men and ropes. But the physics of friction and rope strength makes this incredibly dubious. The alternative is that the Romans found the platform. They found a sacred high place built by the ancients, the Ice Age builders, and they built their temple on top of it, appropriating the grandeur of the past for their own gods. This layering of history is key. We often mistake the last person to use a building for the person who built it. We assume the Incas built Sacsayhuaman in Peru, but the Incas themselves admitted they didn't build it. They said it was built by the giants who came before. The base of Sacsayhuaman features massive, polygonal stones, shaped like marshmallows, fitting together in 3D puzzles that are earthquake-proof. The later Inca construction on top is small, rough, and primitive by comparison. It is a devolution of technology, not an evolution. We see the same pattern in Egypt. The Great Pyramid is a marvel of precision. The later pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties are crumbling piles of rubble. The civilization didn't get better at building pyramids. It got worse. It forgot. This suggests that the high point of technology occurred at the beginning of the dynastic period or before it, and then slowly degraded. This concept of devolution runs contrary to everything we are taught. We believe in the ascent of man, from caveman to space explorer, but the evidence of the stones suggests a jagged path. A peak, a collapse, a long dark age, and then a slow climb back up. The Ice Age was the peak of a different kind of human capability. Not a capability of plastic and silicon, but of stone, sound, mind, and biology. Let's consider the acoustic properties of these ancient sites. In the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta, an underground labyrinth dating back to at least 400 BC and possibly older, there is a room called the Oracle Chamber. If a male voice chants at 110 Hz in this room, the entire complex resonates. 110 Hz is a specific frequency. Neuroscience research has shown that listening to 110 Hz sounds shifts the activity in the human prefrontal cortex, deactivating the language center and activating the parts of the brain associated with mood, empathy, and social behavior. It induces a trance state. This was not accidental. The builders of the hypogeum tuned the rock. They were architects of consciousness. They understood that by manipulating sound and space, they could manipulate the human mind. This is a technology just as potent as our pharmacology. We use pills to alter our brain chemistry. They used resonance. If we view the Ice Age world through this lens, the painted caves, the megalithic circles, the underground chambers, they all become parts of a global machine designed to maintain a certain state of human consciousness, a state of connection, a state of flow. But the machine broke, the comet struck, or the sun flared, or the ice simply gave way. The physical infrastructure of this mental technology was flooded or buried, and humanity was left out of tune. The trauma of the Younger Dryas cannot be overstated. We see evidence of a massive population bottleneck. Genetic studies suggest that at certain points in prehistory, the human breeding population dropped to as few as several thousand individuals. We were an endangered species. Those who survived the cataclysms of 12,800 years ago and 11,600 years ago, the two main spikes of the meltwater pulses, emerged into a world that was broken. The megafauna were rotting in the mud. The coastlines were unrecognizable. The weather was erratic. The rise of agriculture around 10,000 BC is often framed as a glorious invention. But from another angle, it looks like a desperate fallback. We didn't start farming because we wanted to. We started because we had to. The Garden of Eden, the abundant hunter-gatherer paradise, was gone. The curse was to till the soil by the sweat of our brow. Agriculture is hard work. It leads to lower bone density, more disease, and social hierarchy. It is a survival strategy for a resource-poor world. The transition from the Ice Age to the Holocene was not a graduation. It was an eviction. And in the chaos of that eviction, the unified culture of the Ice Age, if it existed, fractured into 1,000 isolated tribes, each holding a shard of the original hologram. One tribe remembered the astronomy, another remembered the masonry, another remembered the agriculture, another remembered the myths, but no one remembered the whole. This fragmentation explains the diffusion anomalies we see. Why do the Maya and the Balinese Hindus use similar architectural styles? Why do the Egyptians and the Incas both wrap their dead in mummies and believe in a journey of the soul involving a weighing of the heart or similar judgment? Why is the concept of the third eye, the pineal gland, present in symbolism from India to Mexico? Academics call this independent invention. The idea that humans everywhere just happen to come up with the exact same complicated ideas. But independent invention struggles to explain the precise details. Pyramid is a stable shape, yes, but a pyramid aligned to the cardinal points, encoding the mathematical value of pi, associated with the constellation Orion, and involving a cult of the dead? That is a specific software package. It is far more plausible that these are the distributed backups of a crash system. As we move deeper into this investigation, we must look at the most controversial evidence of all, the biological evidence within ourselves, the Rh-negative blood mystery. Most humans have Rh-positive blood, meaning they carry the rhesus monkey antigen. A small percentage of the population, highest among the Basque people of Spain and France, an ancient lineage, is Rh-negative. They lack the antigen. In nature, animals of the same species do not reject their own offspring. But an Rh-negative mother will produce antibodies to attack an Rh-positive fetus, causing a miscarriage. Her body treats the baby as a foreign invader. This is a biological anomaly. It suggests a mutation or a lineage that was once separate or isolated for so long that the biological compatibility drifted. Was there a subspecies of human in the Ice Age, perhaps the ruling caste or the navigator caste, that was genetically distinct? The Basque language Euskera is a language isolate. It is related to no other language on Earth. It is believed to be the last surviving language of the Neolithic hunter-gatherers of Europe, before the arrival of the Indo-Europeans. If their blood is different and their language is different, are they the last echo of the Ice Age Europeans? The pieces are scattered. The Basque DNA, the Amazonian soil, the Indonesian pyramids, like Gunung Padang, a site which carbon dating suggests may have layers going back 20,000 years, the Turkish pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the submerged roads of Bimini. Each one is a fact, but together they create a paradox that the standard model cannot hold. The standard model says we were scattered, simple, and disconnected. The evidence says we were connected, complex, and capable of feats we still cannot replicate. We must also consider the role of the Watchers. In the Book of Enoch, an apocryphal text excluded from the Bible, there is a detailed account of 200 Watchers who descended to Mount Hermon near Baalbek and taught humanity forbidden knowledge: metallurgy, astronomy, the making of weapons, the use of cosmetics, mythology, or a memory of contact. If the civilized survivors of the coastal floods moved into the highlands where the hunter-gatherers lived, they would have seemed like gods. They brought forbidden knowledge, technology that disrupted the natural order. They interbred with the locals, the daughters of men. This narrative of civilizing outsiders who bring both knowledge and corruption is universal. It fits perfectly with the idea of a stratified Ice Age world where a high-tech, in their terms, maritime culture collided with low-tech inland tribes during the crisis of the flood. The giants mentioned in these texts might not be 50-foot monsters. They might simply be people of superior stature and nutrition. We know that the Cro-Magnons, Ice Age Europeans, were significantly taller and more robust than the agricultural people who followed them. A 6'6" warrior in bronze armor would look like a giant to a 5'4" malnourished farmer. Everything in myth is a compressed file of history. We just need the password to unzip it. The password is deep time. We must stop thinking in centuries and start thinking in millennia. We must stop thinking of the Earth as a solid stage and start thinking of it as a waterbed, constantly shifting, sinking, and rising. The search for the forgotten Earth is not a search for a magical land. It is a search for the missing chapters of our own biography. We are a species with amnesia. We woke up in the ruins of our grandfather's house, and we have convinced ourselves that we built it. But the wind is blowing through the cracks in the walls. The sand is shifting, and the anomalies are starting to pile up. One of the most striking anomalies involves the precision of ancient measurements. The megalithic yard. Scottish engineer Alexander Thom analyzed hundreds of stone circles in Britain and France and concluded that they were all built using a standard unit of measurement. The megalithic yard, 2.72 feet. How did Stone Age tribes across thousands of miles agree on a standard unit of measurement? A standard unit implies a central bureau of standards. It implies a unified school of mathematics. It implies a government or a religious order with continental reach. And here is the kicker. The megalithic yard is derived from the circumference of the Earth. It is a geodetic unit. If you divide the Earth's polar circumference by 360 degrees, then by 60 minutes, then by 6 seconds, you get a number related to the megalithic yard. This means the builders of Stonehenge didn't just have a ruler. They knew the size of the planet. To know the size of the planet requires measuring the stars from different latitudes. It requires a global perspective. It requires travel. So we return to the image of the Ice Age world. Not a dark, savage place, but a world of high adventure. A world where astronomers stood on the sounding stones of Brittany, tracking the moon. Where navigators sailed the kelp highways of the Pacific, guided by the phosphorescence of the waves. Where priests in the Amazon engineered the soil to feed millions. It was a world of different science. A science of harmonics, of plants, of stone, of mind. And then the water rose. The catastrophe was not just the loss of land. It was the loss of the network. When the trade routes were cut, the isolated pockets of civilization withered. Without the exchange of ideas, technology regressed. We forgot the size of the earth. We forgot how to move the 1,000-ton stones. We forgot how to make the dark earth. We fell into the dark, and we spent the next 10,000 years climbing back up, reinventing the wheel, reinventing writing, reinventing the map. But the ruins remain, silent, massive, and mocking. They stand as a testament to a potential that we have let slip away. But does the Earth's geology even allow such evidence to survive for tens of thousands of years? We must consider the planet's relentless tendency to reset itself. Plate tectonics are the ultimate shredder. In the subduction zones, the ocean floor is pushed under the continents and melted back into magma. Any civilization built on the ocean floor millions of years ago is not just ruined. It is recycled into lava. However, the continental shelves where the Ice Age humans lived are not subducted. They are merely drowned. They are still there, preserving their secrets in the anaerobic mud. Recent underwater archaeology is proving this. In the Doggerland area, we are finding footprints preserved in the petrified mud. In the Black Sea, we find wooden beams perfectly preserved in the oxygen-free depths. The technology to explore these lost worlds is finally catching up to the mystery. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, is stripping away the Amazon canopy to reveal the cities beneath. Side-scan sonar is mapping the continental shelves. We are on the verge of the great reveal. But are we ready for what we will find? If we find undeniable proof, a harbor wall at 400 feet depth, a stone circle on the bottom of the Atlantic, it will break our narrative. It will mean that we are not the apex of progress. We are a restart. We are version 2.0 or perhaps version 5.0 of the human experiment. This realization brings a sense of vertigo. It makes the ground beneath our feet feel less solid. It reminds us that our current civilization, with its skyscrapers and internet cables, is just as fragile as the one that came before. We are built on the same coastlines. We rely on the same stable climate. We are making the same assumption of permanence that they did. As we move toward the climax of this investigation, we must synthesize the theory. We are not looking for Atlantis as a specific city. We are looking for the Atlantean reality, a global, maritime, coastal civilization that thrived during the Ice Age and was destroyed by the rapid sea level rise of the Younger Dryas. This civilization was not high-tech in the way we are. They didn't have plastic or combustion engines. They had high cognition. They used the mind and the natural world in ways we have forgotten. They were the masters of their environment, not its exploiters. And their legacy is not in the things they left behind, but in the myths they encoded to warn us. The warning is simple. The water rises. The sky falls. The cycle ends. The ancients were obsessed with the cycle. The Maya long count calendar. The Hindu yugas. The Greek ages of man. They all tell the same story. Time is circular, not linear. Destruction is part of the program. We are currently in the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age, the age of discord and materialism. According to the ancients, this is the lowest point of the cycle. The point where we have the most stuff, but the least spirit. Where we have the most information, but the least wisdom. But the cycle turns. The golden age returns. But it only returns after the cleansing. Is this just poetry? Or is it a geological observation? The Earth's magnetic field is currently weakening. The poles are drifting faster than they have in recorded history. The sun is entering a new phase of activity. The climate is destabilizing. Are we seeing the signs that the Ice Age astronomers watched for? The story of the Ice Age is not just history. It is a prophecy. It is a message in a bottle, cast into the ocean of time by our ancestors, washing up on our shores just as the tide begins to turn again. Is this just poetry, or is it a geological observation? The Earth's magnetic field is currently weakening. The poles are drifting faster than they have in recorded history. The sun is entering a new phase of activity. The climate is destabilizing. Are we seeing the signs that the Ice Age astronomers watched for? The story of the Ice Age is not just history. It is a prophecy. It is a message in a bottle, cast into the ocean of time by our ancestors, washing up on our shores just as the tide begins to turn again. But to read this message, we must look not just at the water or the ice, but at the invisible shield that protects us all, the magnetosphere. We tend to think of the Earth as a rock, but the Earth is an electrical entity. It is a giant dynamo, a spinning core of molten iron generating a magnetic field that extends thousands of miles into space. This field is the only thing standing between biological life and the stripping, sterilizing radiation of the solar wind. We know from the geological record that this field is not stable. It breathes, pulsates, and occasionally it collapses and flips. The last major excursion, a temporary collapse of the field, occurred roughly 42,000 years ago. It is known as the Loschamp event. During this period, the magnetic shield strength dropped to roughly 5% of its current level. What happens to a planet when its shield drops to 5%? The cosmos floods in. High-energy cosmic rays, which are normally deflected, rain down on the surface. The ozone layer is shredded. The jet streams become chaotic. The climate goes haywire. But more importantly, the biology of the planet is exposed to a specific type of radiation that causes mutation. This brings us to a terrifying hypothesis regarding the sudden leap in human consciousness. We see an explosion of cave art, complex tools, and ritual behavior appearing in the archaeological record roughly 40,000 to 45,000 years ago, exactly coinciding with the Loschamp magnetic collapse. Did the thinning of the magnetic veil change us? Did the influx of cosmic radiation mutate our neurology, or perhaps alter our perception of reality? Shamanic traditions across the world speak of a time when the sky was torn open and the gods descended. They speak of a time when humans could communicate directly with the spirits. From a materialist perspective, we dismiss this as hallucination. But from a geophysics perspective, a collapse of the magnetosphere would literally allow the energy of the universe to penetrate the human brain in ways we cannot experience today. Perhaps the Golden Age was not just about advanced maritime trade. Perhaps it was a time of heightened psychic sensitivity, triggered by the unique electromagnetic environment of the Ice Age. The shamans weren't hallucinating. They were tuning in to a frequency that has since been blocked by the recovery of the magnetic field. But the field is weakening again today. The South Atlantic anomaly, a growing patch of weak magnetism over Brazil and the Atlantic, is expanding. Satellites passing over it have to shut down their electronics to avoid damage. Migratory birds are getting lost. Whales are beaching themselves in record numbers. The navigational systems of nature are glitching. If the Ice Age civilization understood this connection between the magnetic field and consciousness, then their obsession with specific stones makes even more sense. Granite and basalt are paramagnetic. They interact with magnetic fields. The Great Pyramid, the obelisks, the standing stones of Karnak and Stonehenge, they are all high silica, high quartz structures. If you place thousands of tons of quartz-rich stone on a specific acupuncture point of the Earth's crust, a place where the magnetic telluric currents are strong, you are not just building a monument. You are building a stabilizer. Was the global network of megaliths a geoengineering project designed to stabilize the Earth's magnetic grid? Or perhaps to create safe zones where the field could be artificially maintained during a collapse? This sounds like science fiction, but we use similar principles today in our technology. We use quartz to stabilize frequencies in watches and computers. We use magnetic shielding to protect sensitive experiments. The difference is scale. We work with microchips, they worked with mountains. Let us return to the physical evidence of the end. We must confront the black mat. If you dig down into the soil of North America, Europe, and parts of South America, you will eventually hit a thin, dark layer of sediment. It is usually only a few inches thick. Below this line, you find the bones of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, and the Clovis people. Above this line, they are gone. This layer is dated to roughly 12,800 years ago, the start of the Younger Dryas. When scientists analyze this black mat, they find materials that do not belong on Earth. They find nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds that are only formed under the extreme pressure of a cosmic impact. They find high concentrations of iridium and platinum. They find melt glass, dirt that has been flash melted at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, similar to the trinitite found at nuclear test sites. This is the fingerprint of a global firestorm. The leading theory now is that the Earth passed through the tail of a disintegrating giant comet, the Taurid meteor stream. We are still passing through the stream twice a year. We call them the Halloween fireballs. But 12,800 years ago, the stream was denser and the fragments were bigger. Imagine the sky turning white. Not one impact, but thousands. Tunguska-level airbursts detonating over the ice sheets of North America and Europe. The heat would have been instantaneous. The ice wouldn't just melt, it would vaporize. Steam explosions of unimaginable power would blast water vapor into the stratosphere, darkening the sun for years. But the immediate effect was water. The meltwater pulse wasn't a gentle rising tide. It was a sequence of tsunamis. If you were a member of the coastal web civilization living in Doggerland or on the coast of Florida or in the delta of the Tigris, you didn't have years to pack. You had hours, maybe minutes. The walls of water would have scrubbed the continental shelves down to the bedrock. It explains why we find so little. If a tsunami hits a modern city, the destruction is total. Now imagine a tsunami that is 300 feet high, laden with chunks of glacial ice the size of skyscrapers, moving at the speed of a jetliner. It doesn't just destroy buildings, it pulps them. It grinds civilization into a slurry of mud and debris and spreads it over the ocean floor. This brings us to the Derinkuyu anomaly. In the Cappadocia region of Turkey, there is an underground city. It is not a cave, it is an engineered bunker. It extends 18 stories deep into the volcanic rock. It has ventilation shafts that go down hundreds of feet. It has massive circular stone doors, weighing thousands of pounds, that can only be rolled shut from the inside, can house 20,000 people, and it is connected by miles of tunnels to other underground cities. Archaeologists traditionally attribute this to early Christians hiding from Roman persecution. But this explanation collapses under scrutiny. You do not excavate millions of tons of rock with hand tools in secret while an army is chasing you. You do it beforehand. You do it when you have the time and the technology. The Christians may have used it, but they did not build it. Who builds an underground bunker for 20,000 people? You build a bunker if you are afraid of something coming from the sky. You build it if you know the surface is about to become uninhabitable. If the Younger Dryas event involved a solar flare or a cosmic impact that scorched the surface with UV radiation or fire, then the only safe place was underground. The Ant People legends of the Hopi Indians describe exactly this. They say that during the destruction of the first world by fire, the Ant People took the humans underground and taught them how to survive until the sky cooled down. Is Derinkuyu a survival ark? A fallout shelter from the Ice Age? If so, it implies a level of foresight that is terrifying. It implies that someone knew the clock was ticking. And this leads us to the most profound loss of the catastrophe, the loss of the mental internet. We mentioned earlier that the ancients might have possessed a different kind of consciousness. Let's explore the bicameral mind theory through the lens of the Ice Age. Some anthropologists suggest that early humans did not possess self-consciousness, as we define it, the constant internal monologue of I am. Instead, they operated in a state of flow, a state of direct perception, where the voice of the gods, the right hemisphere of the brain, spoke directly to the left hemisphere. In a world without writing, memory was everything. We know that Aboriginal cultures in Australia can memorize song lines that stretch for thousands of miles. They can recite the precise location of every waterhole, every landmark, every danger, in a song that takes days to perform. This is not rote memorization. It is a spatial, holographic memory. If the Ice Age civilization relied on this mental capacity, then their libraries were their elders. Their hard drives were the shamans. When the catastrophe hit, it didn't just destroy the buildings. It killed the hard drives. Imagine a tribe where only 3 people know the song of navigation. The tsunami kills 2 of them. The 3rd one survives but is traumatized, starving, and separated from the group. He dies of exposure a week later. That's it. The knowledge of how to navigate the Pacific Ocean is gone. Forever. This fragility of oral tradition is why the survivors shifted to stone. Stone is the backup system. When the mental internet crashed, they tried to download the data into the rock. The symbols at Göbekli Tepe, the hieroglyphs in Egypt, the intricate knots of the Inca quipu, these are the desperate attempts to externalize a knowledge that used to be internal. We invented writing not as a sign of progress, but as a symptom of loss. We wrote it down because we could no longer remember it. And what exactly were they trying to remember? They were trying to remember the precession of the equinoxes. This is the master key. The Earth wobbles on its axis like a dying top. It takes 25,920 years to complete one full wobble. As it wobbles, the constellation rising behind the sun on the dawn of the spring equinox changes. Roughly every 2,160 years, we move into a new age. Age of Leo, the lion. Age of Taurus, the bull. Age of Aries, the ram. Age of Pisces, the fish. And now the age of Aquarius. To the modern mind, this is astrology, a pseudoscience. But to the ancients, it was a clock that told them when the next reset was due. The numbers 72, 2160, 4320, 25920. These numbers appear in the construction of the Great Pyramid, in its dimensions relative to the Earth. They appear in the Norse myths of Valhalla, 540 doors. 800 warriors coming out of each door equals 432,000. They appear in the Hindu yugas. Why were they obsessed with these numbers? Because they believed, or perhaps they knew, that the catastrophe is not random. It is timed to the cycle. If the Younger Dryas happened roughly 12,900 years ago, that is exactly half of a precessional cycle, approximate 13,000 years. If the Earth has a heartbeat of destruction that beats every half cycle, then we are currently standing at the exact point on the clock where the hand strikes 12 again. This is the destabilizing question that drives the entire mystery. Are we living through the echoes of the past or the pre-shocks of the future? The similarities between our time and the late Ice Age are haunting. Then, rapid technological advancement, the coastal civilizations. Now, the digital age. Then, climate instability and magnetic shifting. Now, climate crisis and magnetic excursion. Then, a disconnect from nature and a hubris about permanence. Now, the exact same hubris, but there is one difference. We have the capacity to understand the mechanism. The ancients encoded the warning in myth because myth is durable. A scientific paper lasts 10 years. A story lasts 10,000. The story of Atlantis is not about a city. It is about a mistake. It is a moral fable about a civilization that became insolent and ceased to respect the divine law, the natural order. In Plato's account, Zeus decides to punish them because they lost their divine element and became purely human, greedy, aggressive, imperialistic. Translate divine element to ecological balance. Translate Zeus to geological forces. The warning is clear. A civilization that fights the planet will eventually lose because the planet has weapons we cannot fight. We are currently fighting the planet. We are altering the atmosphere, the ocean chemistry, the soil. We are poking the dragon. But the Forgotten Earth investigation also reveals our potential. Consider the polygonal walls of Peru, Italy, Egypt, and Japan. These walls are made of massive, irregular stones that fit together so perfectly they are airtight. They are earthquake-proof. When the ground shakes, the stones dance. They move slightly, dissipate the energy, and settle back into place. Our modern concrete buildings crack and collapse. Their walls possess a dynamic stability. This represents a mindset of working with nature, not against it. They didn't try to force the stone into a square brick. They respected the individuality of each stone and found the perfect place for it in the whole. This is a philosophy of architecture that mirrors a philosophy of society. If we could recover that, the ability to build systems that are flexible, resilient, and in harmony with the forces of the earth, we might survive the next turn of the wheel. We must also reconsider the Amazonian legacy. The terraforming of the Amazon was a project of staggering scale. They didn't just plant trees, they curated a biome. They created a food forest that could feed millions without cutting down the canopy. We are currently burning the Amazon to graze cattle. We are destroying the most sophisticated piece of biotechnology on the planet, the forest itself, to produce the most inefficient food source, beef. It is a devolution of intelligence. But the terra preta is still there. The microbes are still alive. We can take a handful of that ancient soil, analyze it, and learn how to heal our own depleted farmlands. The lost technology is not a laser beam. It is a microbe. It is a way of farming. It is a way of being. As we approach the end of this journey, we have to look at the psychological legacy. Why are we so obsessed with the end times? Why do we create religions based on apocalypse? Because deep down, we know we are overdue. There is a concept called catastrophobia, the fear of catastrophe. It drives us to hoard, to conquer, to control. We are trying to build a fortress against the memory of the flood. We build high walls. We build nuclear weapons. We try to dominate nature because we are terrified that nature will dominate us again. But the message of the Ice Age survivors is not one of fear. It is one of endurance. They survived. They crawled out of the bunkers. They replanted the seeds. They rebuilt the world from scratch. The existence of the human race today is proof of their victory. You are alive because someone 12,000 years ago was smart enough, tough enough, and loving enough to keep a child alive through a nuclear winter. You are the descendant of the ultimate survivors. So when you look at the moon or the stars or the ocean, remember that you are looking at the same things they watched. The stage hasn't changed. The script is the same. Only the actors have changed. The forgotten earth is not lost. It is just beneath our feet. It is in our blood. We are the bridge between the world of the ice and the world of the fire. And perhaps, if we listen to the whispers of the stones and the warnings of the myths, we can break the cycle. Perhaps we can be the first civilization to see the pendulum swinging back and, instead of being crushed by it, catch it. We have the satellites. We have the data. We have the knowledge of the past. The question is, do we have the wisdom? The Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau, its eyes damaged, its body eroded by the ancient rains. It stares eternally at the eastern horizon. It is waiting for the sunrise of the equinox. It is waiting for the return of the lion. It has seen the world end before. It knows the signs. The wind blows across the sand, carrying the dust of the ancestors. The ocean currents circulate the water that once drowned the world. The ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica hold the frozen breath of the mammoth hunters. Everything is connected. The past is not behind us. It is around us. To explore the forgotten earth is to explore the depths of our own amnesia. And the cure for amnesia is a shock. The shock of realizing that the map is wrong. The shock of realizing that the timeline is wrong. The shock of realizing that we are not the first. And in that shock, there is a profound liberation. We are free to imagine a different future. A future where we reclaim the lost heritage. A future where we integrate the high technology of the Silicon Age with the high wisdom of the Stone Age. That is the potential of the next cycle. The Earth waits. The cycle turns. The story continues. And you, the viewer, are now part of the remembering. You are now a keeper of the record. What will you do with this knowledge? The tide is coming in.